Right guys, how are we doing? I need to point something out because it seems that some people just don't seem to be able to introvert, which is surreal, to say the least, very limiting, and it's keeping everybody in trauma because they're not facing themselves. So I'm going to explain. An introversion isn't your thought of your head, in your head. You don't introvert into your head. That's just your thoughts. That's just knowing your thoughts. You're not your thoughts are just clouds passing by. Introversion is your feelings. You introvert with your feelings. Yeah? That's know thyself. Otherwise, it's just know thy thoughts. Yeah? So when I say introversion, you introvert and you face your feelings of the moment. You search deep inside yourself, soul searching. Yeah? And that's why some people will struggle, because they can't face their feelings. Why? Because as soon as they do, they're afraid. They're afraid to face themselves. Trauma. And there's the paradoxical. Okay? So when I say introversion, it means going into your heart, going into your feelings. And by doing so, you heal yourself. Because emotions is the lesson. Okay? It's quite simple. And I shouldn't be needing to explain this. It's ridiculous. Know thyself, know thy feelings. Learn from your feelings. Your feelings get dealt with. And so you expand your conscious awareness of yourself, which is simultaneously awareness of the world around you and your own placement within it. Because the real power resides within you. It's not outside sources. That's placement of power of externals, which means you're giving away your own identity to an outer perspective. Yeah? So that is the lesson. That is know thyself. That is know thy soul. And in doing so, it frees up the mind. It makes everything more simple, more easy, more free-flowing, less chaotic, less complicated. Feelings are the lesson. And the trouble is that we live in a world where there's far too many people treat feelings as the enemy. And when people speak to others and they are made to feel a certain way, which is bullshit, they're not made anything. It's them knowing themselves. The people that are treating feelings as the enemy is people that don't know themselves. People don't make you feel anything. Again, that's a placement of power on the outside. You feel those feelings for a purpose, for a reason. And it's an opportunity to know thyself. They're not making you feel that way. You're feeling that way for a reason. Okay? And that's why people go down the manipulation road, because they feel they don't know themselves enough. They start having placement of power on the outside, and so they feel powerless. And then they think that manipulating the outside world is the way to go. And then when questions are thrown at them, they get offended. Why are you making me feel that way? No, I'm not making you feel anyway. You're feeling that way for a reason. There's a lesson there. You shouldn't be getting offended unless they're deliberately trying to manipulate you. But if they're just asking the question, or if they're just being in a certain way that offends you, you need to ask yourself, why are you offended? Not why are they being like that? Because again, that's placement of power on the outside. That's you saying you have no control of your feelings. Everybody else has control of them. Introversion. Know thyself. Know thy feelings. Know thy soul. And then know thy reality. Placement of power then becomes within yourself, not outside sources. And how do you know thyself fully? By facing all of the past, all of the lessons, not being ignorant to them, not viewing it in a dualistic state, which is an egoic plane of lizard brain, fight or flight, self-manipulation, because you're lying to yourself from a greater truth. You're convincing yourself that, oh, it was that way, it must have been meant like that. That wasn't very nice of them. You're deluding yourself. So face everything that's happened to you in the past, painful or not. The more painful, the greater the growing curve, the greater the lesson, the greater the know thyself. So face it all, but it's not right or wrong. Everything is a shade of grey. So it's understanding the shade of grey. It's not a hyper rationalization of reality. We don't live in a dualistic reality. Everything is a shade of grey. And the shade of grey is the lesson of know thyself. Now, when you have a spiritual awakening and you experience the divine of your own soul, and when I say experience, I mean not in your head, I mean in here, in your core center of your being, the energy center, all of your chakras aligning into a single white light source that connects you to God, to divine consciousness. That's when you truly know yourself. That's when you know yourself to such great depths. A super introversion of emotion, of know thyself. When you have that, suddenly your bandwidth from super introversion becomes a mirror of a super extroversion of the mind, because an extroversion is the mind. Essentially, it's utilizing your feelings still. It's an extroversion of your feelings, an expression, an extension, which is when also the egoic planes start to converge, I suppose. It's a extroversion of the self. So, point being is when you know thyself to such great depths, you can also extrovert with soul confidence to great depths, because you know yourself well enough to feel comfortable doing so. And so your whole EQ, emotional intelligence, bandwidth from soul to mind, from introversion to extroversion, becomes greater. You have a greater truth in being. Your reality is a greater truth, because everything is relative. And so that is why people that have had spiritual awakenings, starseeds for example, know people better than they know themselves. Because in the Western world society at least, everybody's running away from their emotions. And you can see it. It becomes all so clear. it becomes obvious that everybody's in their ego all of the time, to certain levels or degrees, because they have that placement of themselves within the mind, and it's not designed to be there. You are not your mind. You are not your thoughts. So when people believe that that's the case, that's what causes the problems. That's what causes the mental issues, the instabilities, because their placement of themselves is their head. So they have to formulate some sort of a stability of the self, of the self-identity. And so they create an egoic identity of the self, which is a delusion. It's a phantom identity. And so, because the mind is singular and it's not unity, every mind is different, you're creating a separatist reality, and your world becomes chaotic. And as soon as somebody questions you or your thoughts or your perspective, the ego is threatened, and that's when you have emotional instabilities and conflict and differences of which seemingly are not resolved, because they don't have the capabilities of resolvement, because their placement is within an ever-changing chaos engine of the mind, essentially, because that's where the questions reside. The soul is unquestionable. It's everything. It's love, which is unity. And so when the placement is the ego, it's separate. It's in a lesser form of unity with everything else, with everybody else. And this is what causes the problems of the world. It all boils down to know thyself. All of it. And the ego isn't know thyself. It's know thy delusion.